back to the In My Beach Boys Room podcast. I am Adam Schreiner, once again sitting here with Matthew Hartz, and we're going to cover the 90s, the Beach Boys in the 90s. We got several albums, Brian Wilson albums, collaboration things, all sorts of different little stuff going on.
And quite a few things.
Yeah, and so we'll do a little deep dive into Summer in Paradise and Imagination, and then we'll cover a couple of the other albums that are just kind of released during that time. But first, you know what we got to do? We got to do that social media stuff. Facebook is, you can just look at Matthew Hartz, look for the kid holding a banjo. That's probably where we're most active. And then obviously on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, helps us out. We love the comments. We really, and the compliments. You guys are awesome. We really appreciate the kind words. And Matt, you've been getting on the discussions.
I got some more to catch up to a little bit, but I did get caught up there for a little while, and then
I'm
they
having
keep
a lot
coming
of
fun. Yeah, and we'll address some of the things today.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay, and then moving on just to like Instagram, Matthew Hartz Music, Twitter, Matthew_Hartz, and I don't think I want to spend much time on anything else. I want to get into we got a whole decade again. So
before we get into the decade part of it, there's a couple of things I want to address from past episodes. And one of the things is a quote from David Leaf's book, The Beach Boys and the California Myth, that I attributed to Van Dyke Parks himself. And it wasn't Van Dyke Parks. It was actually, I'm just going to read this. It's in page 191 of the 1985 edition, but it says, as a friend of mine, who is also a very close friend of Brian's, said, and it may be true, Brian is spineless. I'd like to catch Brian out in the yard so I could get into a little kick-ass with him, to be quite frank. I think he's misbehaved. It's as simple as that. He's just very talented, and I think he's perpetrated a great myth.
Oh.
So anyway.
Okay, and I remember vaguely what, when you kind of said a little kick-ass or whatever. And so you originally said that.
I said that Van Dyke said that himself, and I always thought that, but I was I'm going back through David's book, which is just wonderful, and I thought, oh my gosh, that Van Dyke said that was somebody else that said
Got
that.
Got it. Okay.
Sorry, everybody. The other thing I want to talk about real quick is some of the comments. In some of the comments, they've asked me what I think of the Sounds of Summer mixes. There's a bunch of new mixes on the package that was put out.
And it's like that yellow one behind me?
Yeah.
That's
that 3 LP set. And so I'm going to go ahead and address that real quick because it's my approach is real simple. My favorite way to listen to Beach Boys music is the way it was originally produced. That means I listen to all the 60s stuff up through Pet Sounds and whatever was recorded in mono, what Brian recorded in mono, that's my favorite way to listen to it. I believe there's a lot of magic in his mono mixes and the way that it compresses the vocals and makes it, just everything. Those are my favorite ways to listen to it. A good example of that is like even the backing track for Wouldn't It Be Nice. I much prefer listening to the mono version on the original stack of tracks than the stereo one that they have on the Pet Sounds box set. That's just the preferred. Now, that doesn't mean I don't like listening to the stereo version or other mix. I like it because it gives me new information and I get to look at I think David Leaf has explained it like this too. It's like looking at the painting in a different way. You're able to separate out different colors and, oh wow, that's going on in there too. But to me, some of the stereo mixes, a good example for me is Do You Wanna Dance? The way it separates out the harmony vocals that come in on the second verse, the song loses a ton of magic for me right there. In that you're just not having that mono tight. Sure. Anyway, so I'll kind of get off that train a little bit.
Well, just real quick, I did to understand a little more. So like these remastered versions that are coming out, and that's just like putting, when they're remastering, they're just putting different effects on it and is that kind of
well, actually, and they've done a really great job. They've done some things with the early tunes like Surfin' Safari and Shutdown are really muscular. They've got the drums beefed up and the bass, and there's some really cool things about the new mixes that are really fun to listen to. There's also stuff like Marcella and Mesa Help from early 70s. They're all, and it's fun.
Yeah.
They're great.
Yeah.
It's a different way of listening to it.
And the mono just mean that's the original way in which they were recorded. And
mono is referring only to stuff up through about Pet Sounds and beyond before they started recording in stereo or started doing stuff in stereo, because with about the Friends album, Wild Honey and Friends, they started getting the technology that allowed
the ability
Brian
to do that.
to start doing it that way. But that's anyway, the mono thing was a big thing for Brian because Phil Spector did things that way too. And that's basically just means you've got one sound coming out of your speakers. You don't have any difference from left to right. And the reason Brian did that back in the day was for actually a lot of reasons. People had crummy systems.
Right.
If they had a decent system, they didn't know how to place their speakers so they would be balanced or anything. Lots of stuff like that, to where you had a lot more control over what people heard.
Right.
And also a lot of the early 60s stuff was mixed literally. They got a car stereo speaker and brought it into the recording studio. Chuck Britz and Brian mixed on a car stereo speaker because they knew kids were going to be listening to this stuff in their cars, right?
Right.
And it's mono for a lot of reasons. So that's why it's like that in that part, in that time period. After that, it is stereo. But the original mixes, the way they were done on the original albums, are still my favorite, preferred ways to listen to these things.
Got it.
The new stereo mixes on the box sets and all that stuff, they're neat, informative, but I still...
Like you said, it doesn't mean you don't like them, you just prefer the other way.
I listen to Pet Sounds mono.
Yeah.
You know? So anyway, I hope that answers some questions. I understand some of the complaints that the fans have with the mixes being, like some high-end issues and maybe some noise gate issues. We're getting into really technical stuff here, and I got to admit, I'm forever, I have been the guy that can barely turn his amplifier on. Or I own the recording studio and I have the engineer that, I'm not a very technical guy anyway, but I hope that answers some questions on those things.
Okay, cool.
The other thing I wanted to talk about real quick, I was doing some research for the episode and I happened across Adam Marsland's Pet Squares series that he has on his channel.
His YouTube channel?
Yes, I think it's called Karma Frog or Kama Frog. I can't remember exactly what it is, but he's got Craig Slawinski, Alan Boyd, Darian Sahanaja, and other people consulting with him on these deep dives into the albums as far as what the actual personnel was and who, really deep things that I've always thought about, and especially stuff with the vocals. Like one of the things that he's talking about on the Little Deuce Coupe episode is he talks about there's a high voice in there. To me, it's always been this too, but he says, I think that's Audrey. And I was like going, that is, and some other small examples is like Mike and Dennis doubling on some lead vocals on the Surfer Girl album, which I always suspected. As a matter of fact, there's a lot more doubling going on in Beach Boys history that people go, I wonder if that's Dennis or if it's Mike. Well, actually, it's both.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, but he's just an amazing musician. So he knows the music. He's a historian. He's been involved with many Beach Boy projects and people with the Beach Boys, including Alan Boyd, quite a bit. They did some music work together. So I just wanted to give him a shout out, and
because you're a fan of that one, right? You're a fan of
his
channel,
and I'm going to look at every one of those things just because I'm able to, you know, some of these nerd type things are things that I wouldn't think anybody else would think about, but it's kind of nice to think that, oh, wow, there's somebody that thinks the same thing on some of those small things. Anyway, just wanted to get that out there. Let's get into the episode.
Okay,
now.
well, let's, and so we're picking up in, where we start, 90?
Yeah. So in the late 80s, after Brian's solo record, it was announced that he was thinking about putting Smile out, which had never, Smile was just a legend at this point. And because with the new digital technology, what he thought is you'd be able to program your own Smile. One of the things about Smile is nobody knew what order the songs were going to go in. And so this was like in the late 80s, we were seeing stuff in Billboard and Rolling Stone about Brian. Oh, we might put Smile out and you can just program it any way you want to. And that was, ooh.
Oh.
So that was the initial thing that sparked this interest in the back catalog, but it was announced that Capitol was going to put all the original albums out in what was called Twofers. They were going to be 2 on 1. So the first one was going to be Surfin' Safari and Surfin' USA, then Surfer Girl, and actually I think they did shut down Volume 2 for, I'm not going to get into those nerd reasons, but there were 2 on each reissue. Well, guess what, Adam? At this point, I'm in my second year of college down in Texas. Mm-hmm. I still hadn't heard some of these things, and I was so excited that I was finally going to find out what Heads I Win, Tails You Lose sounded like. All these songs that I knew were on the backs of these records. When I was little and looking at the back of Mom's, they had the other ones advertised with the songs underneath them. So I've known these things for 20 years at this point, right? But I've still never heard the songs. And I'm going, oh my gosh, I'm finally going to get to hear all those songs. You don't know. I mean, I was so ready for all of this stuff. It could have, and actually before the Twofers, Pet Sounds was going to be reissued. That was the first thing they were going to do. And it was going to come with a few bonus tracks. And I still remember all of that stuff was so momentous. David Leaf was a huge part of that. Mark Lynette remastered all the stuff. Dominic Priori also did some of the liner notes for it. But the cool thing is Brian, and this is in that time period, either the late 80s or early 90s, Brian wrote a note for each album. And they are the coolest thing from that perspective at that time. They're still some of the coolest on the CD reissues.
Oh, okay.
Brian wrote a special note about each individual album, but he's writing it from that time period. But it's a really honest look and a really neat look inside of his mind as these things were going to get to be reissued.
Right. Yeah, that's cool.
So it was really cool, the whole thing. Brian's also working on Sweet Insanity around this time, his second solo record. And I think Andy Paley is pretty involved with this one again. But when...
Okay, and refresh me on Andy Paley is...
Andy Paley is the collaborator that started working with him on his first solo record.
On his first solo record,
yes.
Okay.
Wrote a lot of the tunes with him on that, had a lot to do with the production, but became a really good friend. So he's helping to work on this, but Landy has really got his mitts all over it, and Landy's girlfriend, and the lyrics are just... I
already have a problem with the lyrics, so I probably...
Oh, man. Some of the stuff is just, it is what it is, but the music is fantastic.
Great as always, yeah.
And so and I think I've talked about in episodes before that I got my first bootleg of Sweet Insanity from David in that first tranche of stuff that
and he's just working on it. It hasn't...
Yeah, just work it because it ultimately got rejected. Never released.
Got it. I was about to say because this wasn't part of my homework. I feel unprepared now.
So anyway, I got my bootleg of this, and I also got my first Smile bootlegs at this point while I was in college. I ordered them from a guy in New Jersey. And so this is a big time for me, Beach Boys wise. I mean, I had those first Smile bootlegs and hearing Wonderful, the original harpsichord version of it. I was, crippled for days, like I say all the time about everything. But there was a lot going on in my Beach Boy world, even though it doesn't seem like much was going on from an outsider's perspective. But so we got the Sweet Insanity stuff and the bootlegs. Oh, also in 91, Brian puts out his first autobiography, which was basically ghostwritten by Dr. Landy. And there's a writer named Todd Gold who's credited as being the co-writer, who I actually met a buddy of his, a fellow musician, that told me a little of the inside story on that whole deal. But Brian barely had much to do with it. It was a document that was going to be produced because we're going to get into talking about the conservatorship here in a little bit and what went on with Landy. And it was almost like this book was being written to maybe even defend Landy a little bit. Or does that make any sense?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And Brian called it all BS shortly after it was
really?
written. And
okay.
Doesn't remember. He was heavily medicated at the time, though, too. So that's going on in 91. Let's get back to the Beach Boys in 92. And this is where some people are going to, I can hear the comments already.
Yeah.
This is Summer in Paradise, the album. This is 92 Beach Boys. This is a continuation of Kokomo from 88 and Still Cruising from 89. It's just, it's more cheaply produced. And there are things that I just cannot stand at all on this album.
Yeah.
But I'm going to be honest with you. The Terry Melcher stuff, we're going to stop for a second. How many times have you heard me mention Terry Melcher in this whole deal?
Yeah, I mean,
a couple of times.
Yeah, a couple of times. Well, and you drop names all the time, but let me talk about it because this is a good spot. This guy is an old Beach Boy friend of, that's who Bruce was working with doing Beach Boy knockoffs in the early 60s, before he, moved to the Beach Boys. Terry was a great friend of Brian's. He was in on some of the Pet Sound sessions. He was Dennis's buddy too, and he was the guy that he was going to produce Manson, and he lived in the house that Manson ended up hitting. Mm-hmm. So that's this Terry Melcher. Okay.
Right. But he stayed friends with all of those guys and developed a real good relationship with Mike. In the mid 80s, they did the California Dreamin' cover together, Rock and Roll to the Rescue, and then shortly after that, Kokomo.
Right.
And then he's involved with the Still Cruising. So he's still working with them, and it's not that he's a new guy. He knows what's going on with the Beach Boys. He was also in the 60s. He produced the Byrds and Paul Revere and the Raiders.
Okay.
And was the hookup with Van Dyke and Brian. We're talking about a momentous dude.
Right.
Anyway, he produced this record with Mike. I don't think they did it in the greatest studio, but the songs that they wrote together, the Melcher tunes, what I call in here, they're good tunes, and I think that they've been glossed over quite a bit.
Okay.
There are some nice tunes, and we'll get into what they are. But the covers on here are not my favorite,
no.
And there's things that just should have never been done, as far as I'm concerned.
So
the production on it is what I'm just, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say cheap. And I also think it was an independent release from Brother Records, meaning that a record label didn't put it out, because sometimes it's not even listed as an official album.
Oh yeah, no, it's funny you say that. Like you can't even find it on Spotify.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had to another one of those albums. I had to go just like find a playlist on YouTube because it's, Spotify doesn't have it. So.
Right. Well, so what'd you think?
So, real quick, you said this was produced by Mike?
Mike Love and Terry Melcher.
Both. So there's there's the one, because it's funny that you say that, and I didn't write this down, but my first pass through it was actually, I was like, wow, it feels like a lot of Mike Love. Like that's what I felt when I first, like literally, like the first run through. I was like, this feels very Mike Love influence. So it's funny that you say that he produced it. We can run through the tracks real quick. We don't have to get too into them, but the first 3 songs are just. It's Hot Fun in the Summertime,
right?
Surfing, which is I didn't like their the
Hot Fun in the Summertime was originally Sly and the Family Stone, so it's I think late 60s hit.
Oh, is it?
So that's a cover, and it's just a little. I love the tune, but their cover's a little awkward. And then the Surfing redo, I was at the time when I saw that on the cover before I ever heard it, I'm like going, oh man, that's pretty cool. And the way they did it was very 90s.
Very 90s.
And they changed up the structure, but it's still pretty cool that they went back and got it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that way we get Brian's name at least on the album, because otherwise he's not even involved whatsoever.
Oh, really?
And that's a big criticism. As a matter of fact, I hear a lot, what would an album sound like with no participation from Brian Wilson? Summer in Paradise.
I see. Summer of Love also didn't like. Do you know, did that do well? I mean, because I can admit, no, like did anything at the time? No,
nothing did well.
Nothing did well at the time, right?
No, and nothing ever has done well from the album. Summer of Love has been criticized by a lot of people as like, possibly one of the worst things on the record of a very bad record.
Yeah. Island Fever, actually this one I like this
one. When I was re-listening this weekend, I was reminded, I remember being in college driving in my car listening to this thing, and musically in this tune there's some really cool inside modulations going on, and Carl's voice is just kick-ass in spots, and is Still Surfing next after that?
Still Surfing, yeah. It's funny because Island Fever makes you feel, I'm like, oh, okay, maybe we just started rough. Okay, now we get to, nope. And then I just, Still Surfing, I didn't really get into either. I thought it was actually a cover of Don't Worry Baby, that harmony at the beginning.
Well,
I thought,
it's got some of that stuff. So that's another. I like Still Surfing.
Yeah,
and it's a great progression and melody. But I can see why it's all. He doesn't do a whole lot with his law degree, and
well, and just the beginning of it, coming off of Island Fever, and then being like, oh, like Don't Worry Baby is probably in my top 5 of all Beach Boys songs, and so just kind of
so to clear, Island Fever and Still Surfing, they're Melcher Love. So and then what's after? Still Surfing.
Slow Summer Dancing.
Okay. Who this is?
Who's this?
I figured you'd guess from... That's Bruce.
Oh yeah. No, I didn't. I did.
Figured you'd...
Bruce, and then also with Carl.
Al comes in.
That's Al? That comes in?
Summer night.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
That's Al.
Wow, his voice is really good.
And there was actually... Al was... He was being disciplined by the corporation shortly before Summer in Paradise was being made for some reason, for attitude or I can't, one of those things, right? So there was a little bit of animosity during the recording sessions because of some of that stuff.
Oh, interesting. No, I totally did not think that was Al. It was how he comes in is really nice. And then Strange Things Happen to Me.
That's another one that I like. That's another Melcher Love deal that I like.
That one was, at least I felt like I had to pay attention a little more, when I was listening to it. Where some of them, like you said, I don't know, just kind of could just gloss over really. Then I really remember Walking in the Sand.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, see that that's what that's a cover and that's not one of my favorites.
Well,
that's okay.
And I think so, and this always happens when I do these listens, I always get at least one that is just rings in my head. They're like, it'll just get stuck. And for me, for this album, it was this one, like, remember, like that just kept. So, and I think that's why, because if it gets stuck in my head, I mean, there's something catchy to it. So,
yeah.
And then my favorite of all is after that, and it's the one we're
going to cover.
Yeah,
Lahaina, this another Melcher love tune.
Yeah,
and the thing I love about it, the Melcher love tunes, is the chord progressions are nice, and that's not going to be something you're going to resonate with. You know what I mean? That's when I look at these things of why I'm resonating with them is because of just some of those things going on. It's. What was the one we just talked about? Not Still Surfing, but
Slow Summer Dancing, Stranger Things Happen.
Strange Things Happen. That's another one where I can see where it wouldn't, and because I was running through the changes on some of these things, trying to figure out which one to do. And so anyway, I just wanted to say that it's kind of inside baseball of why I would like those tunes. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense.
No, absolutely. And is it Carla? I was confident that it was Carla that came in on like the chorus real nice, but now after you said I was on the other one, do you happen to know
on which
on the chorus on what do you say, Lahaina or whatever?
Lahaina. I think it's Lahaina Aloha.
Lahaina Aloha.
Yeah, that's Carl.
Carl coming in. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, Carl's vocals on this whole thing are just insanely good. Just a little bit further down the road from 85, but still,
yeah. And then Under the Boardwalk, which is one of my favorite songs. The original is one of my favorite songs.
Yeah, I love
of
the
all
original
time,
too.
But not this cover at all. Summer in Paradise. Yeah. And then Forever. I wish they would have just left that alone.
Oh man, that in retrospect, it hurts.
Yeah.
And
so two songs. I mean, of the whole album, two songs I really like: Island Fever and Lahaina.
Lahaina Aloha.
Lahaina Aloha. Love those songs. And then Remember Walking in the Sand, that got stuck in my head, so I got to give that one credit. But other than that, I mean, I see why people, might, would like to erase this album from the Beach Boys, catalog.
And until this weekend, when I was sitting and listening to it again and realizing how much Terry Melcher had to do with it and how big a part he is with Beach Boy history and old friend of Bruce, and Brian, and had done some great things with him. And it's just, I think that it definitely, there's a few things on it that are worth talking about.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that we did. So Summer in Paradise.
There it is.
Yeah. So other thing going on right about this time is Carl and Audrey and Carney and Wendy, Brian's daughters. I think those were the 4 people listed on it, filed for a conservatorship of Brian.
Okay.
Brian's girlfriend, Melinda, at the time, who became his wife and is now his wife, had contacted Carl because this is Love and Mercy, the end of Love and Mercy, right? Where she gets in touch with Carl and tells him of the seriousness from her perspective, and that's when it all gets started. And it was this big time.
Right.
And there was a press conference that actually Stan Love, I think, held the press conference, and Beach Boys lawyers were there, and they were talking about trying to get conservatorship of Brian, and Brian shows up at the press conference.
Oh, wow.
And he speaks. This is on the internet. You can find it easily. Brian Wilson conservatorship. And so he makes a statement with, it's pretty awkward.
Huh.
But to make a long story short on that, which we've already covered some of it, is Landy is gone. There's a restraining order put on him by the end of 92, and he's gone out of Brian's life. They succeeded. There was a judge that was granted Jerome S. Billet. I guess I remember that for some strange reason, but he was Brian's conservator for a while, and I think it transferred to somebody else. But anyway, supposedly the day after Landy was gone, Brian made a phone call to Andy Paley and said, "Hey, I want to make some music with you. Let's get started writing music and recording stuff." And so his buddy that he had been doing stuff with since the first solo record and up through the ill-fated Sweet Insanity stuff, they started doing more writing and recording together. Kind of just Brian was financing it, a lot of it himself, I guess. And there's a lot of stuff out there from this time period. We call it the Paley sessions. A lot of the tunes were used on later Brian solo records.
Okay.
There is nothing official that came out at that time. There's we'll talk about a Beach Boys project that involves some of that in a little bit.
Yeah, when I was looking, when you told me to check it out, and I was researching it and looking, trying to look it up, it was kind of just a whole bunch of random stuff.
And actually,
together.
some people think it's a different time period than what it actually is, or all that.
But essentially,
stuff.
it's just when those two get together after
Brian is free from Dr. Landy.
Okay,
so
that's when when they refer to the like Paley sessions. That's what they're talking about.
That's what I think.
Okay,
yeah. So I'm actually going to talk about right here because it makes sense. This is right in the end of. I graduated from college in 92 at Sam Houston State University, but my wife still had a couple of years, and so we were still down there. But we moved back to Idaho in 94 and opened a music store. But in 93, I was still down there, and we went up to Arlington and saw the Beach Boys, not with Brian, but it was that 93 tour. Here's my Beach Boys Cafe hat that I got at that concert, and this is the Summer in Paradise t-shirt from that tour.
Nice.
And it was an awesome show. It was at Six Flags.
Oh, cool.
And one of the things that stands out to me is, I think about third song in, and it just raised the hair on every inch of my body as Carl rips into Wouldn't It Be Nice.
Oh, nice.
And I'd never heard Carl sing lead on Wouldn't It Be Nice. Oh. It's Brian on the original Owl for live and why Carl did it for a little while in 93, I have no idea, but I was just like, it was a powerhouse too. It's
nice.
Just, I love the way Al does it too, but I just wasn't expecting it. And when it still.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Brings it up. So, and then when we got back to Idaho in 94, my brother John and, my wife and his girlfriend at the time, we went to they were at the Pavilion again, about the same group. It was if anybody remembers that tour, they had the surfboards standing up behind them. That's a kind of a significant thing people remember from that tour, but it was a really good show. Both shows were really good, and the road musicians were just so on point that the shows were really, really excellent.
Nice.
So back to the Beach Boys. 93, after all the Twofers and Pet Sounds and all that stuff comes out, Capitol decides to put out the first box set, and it was a really special time. I was waiting for that thing to come out because it was going to have Smile tracks on it. Now, I'd already had my Smile bootlegs, and there wasn't much that came out officially that I hadn't already heard, but it was still momentous for anything to come out from Smile.
Right, absolutely.
That was on the box set, and tons of other unreleased things. And it was, man, I was swimming in that box set for a long time, but that's Mark Lynette did all the music stuff for it, and David Leaf was a huge part of that box set. Okay. Now, back to Brian a little bit in, I think, 92, because since the late 80s, Brian sued A&M Records. They were the ones that bought the catalog from Murray for $700 whatever thousand in late. And Brian claimed at this time that he'd his signature was forged.
Right. I remember you
He
said
wasn't in
about
the
that
mental.
last time.
Yeah. So anyway, he sued them for quite a whole bunch, maybe even as much as like $100 million. In 92, I think he settled with them for 10. But then Mike sued Brian for 5 because Mike claimed writer's credit on 35 tunes he hadn't been credited with. So this is all going on during this time. It gets started in 92, Mike's suit, right? So just for a little background for everybody. Okay, now back to the Beach Boys proper. In 95, they get started with the producer Don Was, who was in that Long Promised Road documentary quite a bit, Analyzing God Only Knows. Yeah. They get started with, he was a hot producer at the time, and they get started on a project with him and Brian, and they're going to use some tunes from the Paley session, Soul Searching and You're Still a Mystery. I know those are 2 tunes they worked on. And they got a little traction, and there's the recordings are out there floating around of what they got done. But for a lot of reasons, and I guess Carl had some of the biggest objections to it at the time, it didn't come out. And there's even been somebody in the comments talking about that, about how Carl wasn't supportive of Brian in that instance. And I have to agree, it sure looks like it on some level, right? But that stuff did not come out with the Beach Boys. It just kind of got killed.
Right.
Well, instead, Don Was does a great documentary on Brian called I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. It's shot in black and white. It's got some great people in it. And they also put out a soundtrack album with it, with Brian re-recording a bunch of great tunes like Melt Away and Caroline No. And that got a lot of traction for Brian Beach Boy land, that little project. But then also in 95, Van Dyke approached him about doing all the vocals on his new album called Orange Crate Art. That's all Van Dyke's music. There's no Brian Wilson music whatsoever. So it's the strangest thing in the world. Brian didn't write a speck of any of this, but he did do all the vocals and do the vocal arrangements.
So he's singing Van Dyke's songs?
Songs, right.
Interesting.
And whereas the other is almost kind of the other way around on Smile, where most of the music is Brian and the lyrics are all Van Dyke, but Van Dyke's not singing, but you see what I mean? It's kind of an odd thing. And I one of the stories about like one of the first sessions is like Brian was out there getting ready to record a vocal, and he just kind of went, "What am I even doing here?" and Van Dyke says, "You're here because I can't stand the sound of my own voice." And he goes, "Okay," and I actually had many years ago on MySpace, I think, I was one of Brian's band members, one of the Wondermints, Probin Gregory. I had a little dialogue with him on this, and he was telling me some inside stories about Brian doing his vocals and having to stick his face in a bucket of ice water or something like that. Just another weird Brian thing. I mean, in between vocal takes or something. I swear.
That's
but
crazy.
Orange Crate Art is a great record.
It's good music.
Yeah.
I was like, this music, it's really well done, I thought.
And Brian's vocals are really intricate, and he's singing, stacking all those things and stuff. Can you imagine for a guy that's not as brilliant as him? He puts those things together in his head on the fly.
Right.
He thinks that complex.
Right.
It's just amazing. So I love Orange Crate Art, and I got to, that was one of the things I got to talk about with Van Dyke when John Hartford hooked me up with him. We talked about some of that stuff. So
yeah, I thought the album was just like, whoa, this is just, I just thought it was, I didn't get to run through it as many times as the other albums, but yeah, it was just good. It was just good.
Completely different.
I didn't know that. I didn't know if Brian had a hand in the writing of it or not. But yeah, I mean, it was just good music.
Yeah. Okay. '96, we're going to talk about Stars and Stripes. And everybody's going, oh no, why? And I understand, guys. I really do. And you're talking to a guy that has
not popular with...
Well, no, I'm going to tell you here in a second.
Right.
I understand. I mean, here I am, this fiddle guy, right? That, there's not much top 40 country music I can really stand.
Yeah.
It's not.
Which is funny.
It's not really
the
my
music you play with.
Yeah.
Playing.
And so, I wasn't particularly fond of the Beach Boys doing a country project either, except for I could understand the novelty of it. And my whole thing is my proximity to it, because that's when my friend Larry Franklin got involved with them. We got to go off on a Larry thing real quick here. He's about the third generation in an amazing, legendary Texas fiddle family, the Franklin family. Mm-hmm. His dad was one of the biggest movers and shakers. But Larry not only did that, but he was a member of the Western swing band Asleep at the Wheel in their heyday, when they were most popular in the early 80s. He had some of his own bands. Right now he plays with the Time Jumpers in Nashville, includes Vince Gill, Paul Franklin. It's an all-star band that gets together on a regular basis in Nashville. Plus, Larry, at the time of Stars and Stripes especially, but even beyond that, was doing a ton of session work, probably getting more fiddle session work than anybody in Nashville at the time. And I'm sure he was working with Joe Thomas, who was the producer of this Stars and Stripes thing that I guess Mike had met. And then before we get into the album proper, I just have to say it's so weird, because just the other day I got hired to do an event with Larry in Athens, Alabama on October 8th. We're judging a great big fiddle contest together. It's supposedly going to have more prize money than any contest in the nation. And so Larry and I are going to be judging that. I haven't seen him in about 5 years, but the last time I saw him, I went and saw him play with the Time Jumpers, and he got me up there to play with them. And
oh, nice! You got to play with them.
Well, and yeah, so sitting,
Were you playing guitar or fiddle?
Fiddle. I played fiddle, and then I was one of the three guests they had that night, but also guesting that night was Chris Isaac, and I got to have a real cool conversation with him, and it was a neat night, So there's Larry for you guys, and now we'll get back to Stars and Stripes. Mike somehow gets this affiliation with Joe Thomas, and they talk about doing this album with country artists covering the Beach Boys, and the Beach Boys being the singing background, and also helping with the tracks and everything. And Carl was involved, and so anyway, they wanted to get Brian involved, and they called Brian, and he had one stipulation: that Willie Nelson would do it. And so they called Willie Nelson, and he said that he would do it. One of the funniest stories about this is Warmth of the Sun, and Willie came in to record it. And, Willie has a famously different way of phrasing. Uh-huh. That's one of his things, some of it seems really late sometimes. It's certainly not orthodox.
Right.
And I guess he was recording his vocal for the Warmth. Here's Willie Nelson, right? Mm-hmm. And Mike all of a sudden goes in and starts talking to him about his phrasing, that maybe you could do it. And Brian there's video of Brian telling the story, and Mike's in there telling Willie Nelson, about his phrasing, and finally, Mike gets embarrassed as well. You just do it's awkward and funny and authentic at the same time. It's a real moment, right?
Yeah.
But the whole project was cool. Larry they did a bunch of shows in Nashville. They participated in what is called Fanfare that year. So there's a documentary about the Stars and Stripes deal that I think Alan had a big part to do with. And there's lots of footage of them performing with those musicians that played on the record, including Larry. And that's when Larry said, yeah, man, Carl seemed to really like the fiddle. And I told him, that's because he was a fiddle fan when he was a little kid. it's a nice project. It got them going on some other things, including this is what led to him. Brian really loved Joe Thomas, ends up buying a house next door to him in Chicago. In a couple years later, goes out there and makes the Imagination album with him, and Larry gets to play on that too, right? So anyway, we'll go.
Larry's on
Imagination all over. Yeah, he's playing all the string parts on it. Yeah. So, but after Stars and Stripes, 97 is big. It would have been 96 because David tried to get it done on the 30th anniversary of Pet Sounds, but the Pet Sounds box set comes out.
Okay.
There was trouble in Beach Boy land. Somebody didn't like, I think Mike was a little bit unhappy with the way the introduction read, so Mike got to write a new introduction or something. Anyway, it came out a year after it was supposed to, but that was big in Beach Boy world. It was David and Mark again, and Alan. Oh yeah, especially Alan. I think Alan at this point. It's just an amazing document of the whole Pet Sounds period. That I think should be required listening for musicians.
Oh, nice.
It's really, really, really cool. Sad thing is though, we start hearing stuff about Carl being really sick at this point.
Oh no.
And he's getting sick enough to where you can see, and he has to wear a wig at the end of his life, and even at some of the last performances, because
it was lung cancer again. Is that what it was?
Yeah, lung and brain cancer.
Oh, damn.
But right before Carl passed away, David Marks was brought back into the Beach Boys touring band from after being let go in 1963. Mike got in touch with him, reached out to him, and wanted to see if he was healthy and could possibly do it. And everybody thinks it was to replace an ailing Carl, but David and other people say, no, it was actually to be in the band and hoping that it would be with Carl, not to replace a sick Carl.
Gotcha.
But he came back into the fold and starts working with them again for a little bit, then leaves for a while, then comes back later. We'll get into that. Mike does a little project at this time, Mike and Bruce and David. One of our comments asked about if we were going to cover this at all, and sometimes I wonder if our Beach Boy fans are being a little facetious, but they asked if we were going to cover the NASCAR 66. It's a special CD that was only available at like 66 gas stations, those Phillips 66.
Oh, okay.
And so it was kind of more of a promotional thing. I told that that fan that I like the version of Ballad of Old Betsy is kind of nice on there, but there's nothing on there that
really warrants us.
Yeah, well, it's cool though, and I like the there's some cool things on it.
Yeah,
I like it. In the end of 97, Audrey passes away.
Okay.
I think it was something having to do with kidneys
And Carl hasn't passed, or
not quite.
Yet.
He's
Okay.
really sick though, and they were very close, very, very, very close throughout the whole life. And I hear Mike talk about that a lot, about how close they were, and how he thinks that it was really taxing once that Audrey passed away, that Carl, it really was only a couple months. She was like December of 97, and then he's February of 98. After that, with Carl's passing, Brian has been working on Imagination, that second solo record, with Joe Thomas.
Okay.
Living in Chicago, right next door. Moves out there just basically to make that record. Larry told me when he went to do his parts, he said that he didn't see a lot of Brian, and that Brian was a little bit sick.
Oh, really?
I'm sure that was a common thing that studio musicians heard at the time. There's more to the story than that, but basically, I don't know how much of the tracking Brian's really involved with.
Got it.
But Imagination. I remember when I got it home and listened to like the first cut on it, I was just like thrilled with Imagination. Thinking that's a good tune. I'll go through my highlights of it. Unless you want to pitch yours to me.
No, I liked this album.
Oh, I do too.
Almost in its entirety. I liked it.
People criticize it for being too slickly produced.
That's the
Joe Thomas vibe, and but it is very. I get that part of it, but it's a really, really good album. I love Imagination.
Yeah, I love it.
She says that She Needs Me is one of my favorites, but it dates back to 1965 as a song that was going to be called Sandy on the Summer Days and Summer Nights.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it was great to. He also thought about releasing it in the 70s and had re-recorded the vocal as Sherry, She Needs Me. So it was Sandy, then Sherry, She Needs Me, and then finally we get it as She Says That She Needs Me.
Got it.
And so we finally get an official release of this beautiful melody and chord progression that we've heard of Brian since 1965, and that was really cool.
Yeah, the verse specifically I really like. I don't know, is there something about the
there's
verse,
a really killer chord progression going from a 4 to a flat 7 in there that just gets me every time.
Yeah.
It's a little baby if you don't stop crying.
Yeah.
It is just insane.
Yeah, and that's and normally I don't know, I don't really catch things like that on the verse, but there was something about this one that definitely caught my ear.
You got South American, which is with Jimmy Buffett.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think there's some other guests on here. That's a cool little sing-along tune.
Yeah,
it's a pretty simple deal, but Brian, again, some good Brian vocals on here.
Yeah, they really are.
Even different from the first solo album. It seems like he's got a little bit more soul in them. They don't sound as dry, I guess is what, maybe that's not a good explanation, but it is, let's see, Where Has Love Been?
Yeah.
That's from J.D. Souther, who is basically a writer associated with the Eagles in the 70s. He did lots of things, but he co-wrote this tune.
Okay.
I think with Andy Paley and Brian.
Yeah, I liked it. I like this one too. Nothing that really stuck out to me, but I definitely like this one.
I'm trying to think.
And then we go to Keep an Eye on Summer.
That's an old from Shut Down Volume 2. That's a cover of a Beach Boy tune for him. And there's two of those here.
I thought it was, and it's funny you say that because I thought, and maybe I didn't know, but like Girls on the Beach similarities.
Yeah, it's right. It's the same. Very good,
okay.
Adam. And same vein, same time period.
I literally wrote my notes on this one are Girls on the Beach similarities with a question mark, and reminded me of an old Beach Boy song.
Golly.
That's what I wrote.
Ladies and gentlemen, we need to give him 5 gold stars,
I'm getting
man.
tuned up on my Beach Boys
and
stuff.
Listen to Larry Shines on this one. He does these arpeggiated violin part. Okay. Listen to that again. But Larry's all over this album. It's pretty cool. He's pretending he's a classical violinist, but he's a fiddle,
Got it. Dream Angels next.
That's not my favorite. And
it's got a catchy hook. It's got a catchy hook on it, which kind of, stuck out to me. And but just a song, I just like it. It's like there's, like I said, I pretty much like the entirety of this album. Then we go to Cry.
Cry is a tune that he and Melinda got in an argument, and he wrote that tune out of that, or in that time frame. And I know a lot of people that really like this tune. This tune is really interesting musically. I like it okay.
Yeah, I liked it. I really liked the guitar, the kind of the tone of the guitar. I think is kind of what stuck out to me. I don't know, or maybe it's just the guitar in general. I don't know what's going on there, but that's the music definitely stuck out to me on this one, and the guitar specifically. Lay Down Burden,
right?
Yeah, I don't know. This
was done as it was already being recorded, but he either wanted Carl to sing this before Carl died. He definitely dedicated it to Carl after Carl passed.
Sure.
And so laying down the burden of, I guess people say, what? That's not about Carl. Well, no, it's the spirit of the song. And so is kind of a little tribute there. And I think that maybe originally he wanted Carl to sing that. So
Let Him Run Wild.
that's from Summer Days and Summer Nights.
I think the music on this one's my favorite. The music of all the tracks, the music specifically, I think is my favorite.
I'll bet you when we go back through the '60s albums, you're gonna love the original too.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
And so what was the original? This was
on Summer Days and Summer Nights.
And Let Him Run Wild. That's the actual name of the song.
Yeah,
and okay.
That and Keep an Eye on Summer are actually covers of things that were released on Beach Boy albums.
Got it. Okay. And seeing this is me not actually running through those albums.
Let Him Run Wild, as a matter of fact, and that's for some reason Carl and Dennis point to that as like, woo, that's when the door really starts flying open. To me, it was even the Today out in '64 stuff on some of even the earlier albums, but Carl and Dennis go, oh, that's, Let 'Em Run Wild in 1965, that Summer Days album. That's when the door really starts to fly open for Brian musically.
Sunshine?
Yeah.
I mean, just...
I think it's a cool tune. And I love the tag on the end of it. It's like an old Beach Boy tag.
Yeah. Happy Days is how I have as the last song here. A lot going on in this one. There's definitely a lot going on. I can't say that, I like it, but it's definitely interesting. I'm curious. As I'm listening, I'm curious
remember on the Feel Flows deal where I was telling, there's this song called My Solution on there where it's a Halloween deal and it's spooky and he's talking. They've recycled part of this in the front of that. So we have part of a previous Beach Boy tune. The weird part of it is the part that I think that's what I think you're talking about.
Yeah, well, and
that's My Solution.
Yeah, like I said, it was just like I said. I when I was listening, I was like, I want to keep listening. I can't say that I like this, but I want to keep listening to it. I don't know. It was interesting.
Brian did a couple of shows in I think in St. Charles or close to Chicago, right as he was finishing up with the record, and some of the studio musicians played the concert with him, and Timothy Schmidt from the Eagles, Bruce came in and sang on the concert. And the shows went over well enough that Brian decided, you know what, maybe I'll go out and tour.
Oh wow. And
so I think it was 99. And I think it was the third show of the first tour. And I was so excited. Me and Donetta, my first wife, we flew up to Seattle to the Moore Theater. I've got the program someplace here, but man, it was cool. I saw David Leaf before the show and went up to him, talked to him, because it would been just like early 90s when I contacted him, called him dry on the phone, and I said, hey, I don't know if you're married. Oh, the fiddle player from the Texas, and I said, well, back in Idaho now. But anyway, I got to see him for just a little bit and shake his hand, and that was cool.
Nice.
Because he was kind of managing Brian at the time. That show blew me away. Those Beach Boys shows in the mid-90s were something, but oh my goodness. The film that they played in the beginning of just like montage of early footage and all kinds of studio stuff, and then they morph into him working on the little girl I once knew, the actual studio sessions, and you're kind of watching, you're kind of disoriented, and then about the time he counts it off on the old studio footage, the curtain goes up and the band goes into Little Girl I Once Knew, and
nice.
But I'm not going to say what I almost did. Yeah. I mean, I was just in pure heaven that night. All the wonderments and everybody else associated with those shows, they did such a phenomenal job of preparing and getting ready for those things. And
really good show.
They just supported Brian. And those shows, even in the very beginning, were more about Brian's music than they were about Brian.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so that's not the only time I got to see Brian solo, and we'll talk about one of the next times, or actually a couple other times in the next episode, including one on the Smile Tour, in 2004. But That's pretty much going to take us to the end of the 90s.
Okay.
That's the best I can do. I hope that wasn't too rambling.
Well, and like it's an interesting time period for them. It kind of seems like, obviously with Carl passing and just a lot of changes going on with them, and it was.
Yeah, kind of, like Al said in the wake of that. Whoa, hey, Endless Harmony, Alan's documentary. Oh my gosh. That came out in 98.
Okay.
And it really, to me, that's still...
Yeah, that's the one you had me...
Yeah, I think he did such a fantastic job. I think visually, everything, it's just a pretty comprehensive Beach Boys documentary, and that was huge for me in the late 90s too. So much thanks to Alan for everything he does.
Yeah, that's awesome. So if that's the end of this episode, then we're looking at 2 episodes left. We're going to do Mike next, right?
Sure.
We're going to do the Mike episode left, and then that will cover, we have done...
And then we're just going to do 1 episode from 2000 to now. Mm-hmm.
And then that'll wrap us up, and we'll, in that last episode, we'll kind of talk about the future plans of this podcast, and then we'll just go from, kind of go from there. But that wraps up the 90s and what the Beach Boys were doing there. Nothing else. We'll just see you in the next episode.